What happens when two of the most outspoken women in entertainment clash on live television with millions watching as royal secrets are exposed, and emotions reach a breaking point? The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and by the end tears were flowing, and audiences were left speechless. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments what you think really caused this explosive confrontation. The studio lights were blazing hot that Tuesday afternoon as The View prepared for what was supposed to be a routine celebrity interview. Whoopi Goldberg sat at her familiar spot at the table, reviewing her notes one final time. She had been doing this for years, interviewing countless celebrities, politicians, and public figures, but something felt different about today. The producers had been unusually secretive about the talking points, and there were whispers around the studio that this interview might get heated. Meghan Markle walked onto the set with her usual composed demeanor, wearing an elegant navy blue dress that commanded attention without being flashy. She smiled and waved to the live studio audience, who erupted in applause, but those who knew how to read body language could see the subtle signs of tension. The way her shoulders were just a bit too rigid, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, as Meghan took her seat across from the panel. Whoopi offered a warm greeting that seemed genuine enough. On the surface, the cameras rolled, and the interview began with typical softball questions about Meghan's latest projects and her life in California. Everything seemed perfectly normal, almost boring, even as they discussed her podcast and various charitable endeavors. But Whoopi had something else on her mind, something that had been bothering her for months. As someone who had never been afraid to speak her mind, especially about issues of authenticity and privilege, she had been watching Meghan's public narrative unfold with growing skepticism. The carefully crafted image, the selective storytelling, the way certain details never quite added up, it all rubbed Whoopi the wrong way. The turning point came when they started discussing Meghan's relationship with the British media and her claims about how she was treated differently than other members of the royal family. Meghan began recounting familiar talking points about the unfair coverage and the double standards she faced. She spoke with practiced precision, hitting all the emotional beats that had worked so well in her previous interviews. Whoopi listened patiently at first, nodding along, but her expression gradually began to change. Her eyebrows raised slightly, and she started shifting in her chair. The other co-hosts seemed to sense something was building, glancing nervously between Whoopi and their guest. When Meghan finished her explanation about media bias, there was a moment of silence that stretched just a beat too long. Whoopi leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on a tone that regular viewers of The View would recognize as dangerous territory. "Now hold on a minute, Meghan," Whoopi said, her words measured, but carrying an undercurrent of challenge. "Been in this business for a very long time, and I've seen a lot of people come and go. I've watched how the media works, and I've seen how people try to control their narratives." The studio audience, which had been murmuring softly, went completely quiet. Even the camera operators seemed to lean in closer, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Meghan's posture straightened, and her media-trained smile became more forced. "I'm not sure what you're getting at, Whoopi," she replied, trying to maintain her composure while clearly preparing for whatever was coming next. "What I'm getting at," Whoopi continued, her voice gaining strength, "is that I think there's a lot more to your story than what you've been telling people. And I think it's time someone asked you the real questions instead of just letting you repeat the same talking points over and over again." The tension in the studio became palpable. The other hosts exchanged worried glances, knowing that Whoopi was about to go off script in a big way. The producers in the control room were probably having heart attacks, but this was live television, and there was no stopping what was about to unfold. Meghan tried to deflect with a laugh, but it came out hollow and nervous. "I think I've been pretty open about my experiences, Whoopi. I'm not sure what more you want me to say." "Oh, I think you know exactly what I want you to say," Whoopi shot back, her legendary directness now on full display. "Let's start with the real reason you and Harry left England, and don't give me that rehearsed speech about seeking privacy and independence, because nobody who actually wants privacy does a Netflix deal and a book tour, the words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before a duel. Meghan's carefully constructed facade began to crack, and for the first time since she sat down, her true emotions started to show through her jaw tightened, and her hands, which had been resting calmly in her lap, began to fidget with her wedding ring. I think that's a pretty unfair characterization of our situation, Meghan replied, her voice rising slightly. We left because we weren't being supported by the institution, and because the media coverage was becoming unbearable. We had to find a way to support ourselves and our family. Whoopi wasn't buying it, and she wasn't about to let Meghan off the hook. Support yourselves. You married into one of the wealthiest families in the world. You had everything handed to you on a silver platter. And then you walked away and spent the next few years complaining about how hard your life was. Do you have any idea how that sounds to people who are actually struggling? The accusation hit Meghan like a physical blow. Her face flushed, and her voice took on a defensive edge that viewers had never heard before. You don't know what it was like, Whoopi Ma. You don't know what it's like to have every single thing you do scrutinized and criticized. You don't know what it's like to feel completely alone in a system that's designed to protect everyone except you. Oh, but I do know, Whoopi fired back, her own voice rising now. I know exactly what it's like to be the only black woman in spaces where I wasn't wanted. I know what it's like to have to fight for every opportunity to have people question whether I belonged, to deal with racism and discrimination that wasn't subtle or hidden behind palace walls. The difference is I didn't have millions of dollars and a title to cushion the blow. Comparison stung, and Meghan's composure finally began to crack in a way that millions of viewers could see. Her eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and hurt, and when she spoke again, her voice trembled with barely contained emotion. That's not fair, Whoopi. You're minimizing my experience because of my circumstances, but pain is pain regardless of your bank account. I never asked for any of this. I fell in love with someone, and suddenly my entire life was turned upside down. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, but her gaze never wavered from Meghan's face. Nobody forced you to marry him, Meghan. You knew exactly what you were getting into. You had access to advisors, to people who could have prepared you for what royal life would be like. But instead of adapting, instead of learning how to work within the system, you decided to burn it all down and play victim. The other hosts were frozen in their seats, unsure whether to intervene or let this unprecedented confrontation continue. The studio audience was so quiet you could hear a pin drop, everyone sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Meghan's hands were shaking now, and her voice grew stronger. Her anger mounted. Work within the system that leaked stories about me to the press, the system that refused to protect me and my son from racist attacks, the system that made me feel so isolated and hopeless that I had thoughts of ending my own life. And there it is, Whoopi said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Every time someone challenges you, every time someone asks you to take responsibility for your own choices, you pull out the mental health card. You talk about suicidal thoughts and racism like they're shields that protect you from any criticism. The accusation was so direct, so brutal, that the entire studio seemed to collectively hold its breath. Meghan's face went pale, and for a moment she looked genuinely shocked that someone would dare to challenge her on such a sensitive topic. How dare you? Meghan whispered, her voice barely audible, but carrying the weight of genuine hurt. How dare you dismiss my pain like that? I opened up about the darkest period of my life because I thought it might help other people who were struggling. I never used it as an excuse. Whoopi's expression softened slightly, but she didn't back down. Look, I'm not saying your pain wasn't real. Mental health struggles are serious, and I would never minimize that, but what I am saying is that you can't use your pain to justify every decision you've made, since then you can't use it to deflect from legitimate questions about your behavior. What behavior? Meghan shot back, her voice rising. What exactly are you accusing me of, Whoopi? Because I'm sitting here trying to have a civil conversation, and you're attacking me for things I never even did. I'm talking about the way you've systematically destroyed relationships with people who are supposed to be your family. Whoopi replied, her voice steady but firm. I'm talking about the way you've used the media to tell your side of every story, while the people you're accusing can't defend themselves because of protocol. I'm talking about the way you've turned every private family matter into a public spectacle. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I think I've heard enough. This isn't an interview, it's an ambush. You invited me here under false pretenses, just so you could humiliate me on television. Sit down. Meghan, Whoopi said firmly. Nobody's ambushing you. These are questions that millions of people have been asking, and you agreed to come on this show. If you can't handle honest questions, then maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. The studio was electric with tension. Camera operators were getting close-ups of both women, capturing every micro-expression, every moment of this unprecedented confrontation. The other co-hosts looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. Meghan remained standing, her whole body trembling with emotion. Honest questions. You're not asking questions, you're making accusations. You're attacking my character, my marriage, my mental health. This isn't journalism, it's character assassination. Character assassination. Whoopi laughed, but there was no humor in it. Meghan, you've spent the last few years doing interviews where you've talked about how terrible your in-laws are, how racist the institution is, how badly you were treated. You've written books and done documentaries airing your family's private business. And now you want to act like you're the victim when someone asks you to account for your own actions. Those weren't attacks, they were my truth. Meghan said, her voice cracking with emotion. I shared my experiences because I thought it was important for people to know what really happened. I never set out to hurt anyone. Your truth. Whoopi's voice was incredulous. Meghan, there's truth, and then there's your version of events. And from where I'm sitting, your version always seems to paint you as the innocent victim and everyone else as the villain. That's not truth, that's selective storytelling. The words hit Meghan like physical blows. Tears were starting to form in her eyes, but she was fighting them back with everything she had. You don't know what you're talking about. You weren't there. You don't know what it was like to be the only person of color in that family, to feel like an outsider every single day. And you don't know what it was like for me to be the only black woman in spaces where I had to prove myself every single day without the benefit of a title or a prince to protect me. Whoopi countered. The difference is I didn't spend my time complaining about it. I worked twice as hard. I proved myself over and over again, and I built my own success. So because you suffered in silence, I should have too. Meghan's voice was getting higher, more desperate. Because you didn't speak out about the racism you faced, I'm not allowed to speak out about mine. I'm not saying you shouldn't speak out about racism, Whoopi replied, her voice measured but intense. I'm saying you should be honest about what actually happened instead of turning every uncomfortable moment into a racial incident. I'm saying you should take some responsibility for your own role in the conflicts you've had. Meghan's composure finally shattered completely. The tears she had been holding back began to flow, and her voice broke as she spoke. I can't believe this is happening. I came here thinking I could have an honest conversation about my experiences, and instead I'm being attacked and blamed for things that weren't my fault. The sight of Meghan crying seemed to affect some of the other co-hosts who looked like they wanted to comfort her, but Whoopi remained unmoved. Those tears might work with other interviewers, Meghan, but they don't work with me. I've been in this business too long to be manipulated by emotions. I'm not trying to manipulate anyone. Meghan sobbed, her carefully constructed public image completely gone now. I'm just trying to tell my story to help people understand what I went through. Why is that so wrong? Whoopi's expression remained stern, but something in Meghan's broken voice seemed to pierce through her armor of skepticism. Still, she wasn't ready to let this go. It's not wrong to tell your story, Meghan. What's wrong is telling only that make you look good while leaving out the parts that might make people question your version of events. Meghan wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup. But the tears kept coming. What parts am I leaving out? What are you accusing me of hiding? I'm talking about the staff members who left because of how they were treated, Whoopi said, her voice gaining momentum again. I'm talking about the reports of bullying, the way you allegedly spoke to people who were just trying to do their jobs. I'm talking about the way you seem to expect special treatment while complaining about being treated differently. Those were lies, Meghan said through her tears. but her voice lacked conviction. Those stories were planted by people who wanted to discredit me. I never bullied anyone. I had high standards, yes, but I was never cruel or unreasonable. Whoopi leaned forward, her eyes boring into Meghan's high standards. Meghan, there's a difference between having high standards and being impossible to work with, and from what I've heard through the industry grapevine, you burned through staff faster than anyone could keep track of. The accusation seemed to hit Meghan particularly hard. She was crying openly now, no longer trying to maintain any pretense of composure. You're getting your information from gossip and tabloid stories. You don't know the truth about what happened behind closed doors. Then tell me the truth will be challenged. Stop crying and start explaining. If these stories are all lies, if you were the perfect duchess who was just misunderstood, then set the record straight. Right now tell me exactly what happened with your staff. Meghan looked around studio desperately as if searching for an escape route. The other hosts were watching in stunned silence. The audience was barely breathing, and the cameras were capturing every moment of her breakdown. I don't have to justify myself to you or anyone else. The people who worked with me know truth. The people who worked with you either signed non-disclosure agreements or were too afraid to speak publicly. Will be shot back. That's convenient for you, isn't it? Everyone who might contradict your story is legally bound to stay quiet. That's how these institutions work, Meghan said weakly, her fight seeming to drain out of her. Everyone signs agreements. It's not specific to me, but it sure works out well for your narrative, doesn't it? Whoopi pressed. You get to tell your side of every story. While the people you're accusing can't defend themselves, you get to play victim while your alleged victims have to stay silent. Meghan buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. When she looked up, her eyes were red and puffy, her makeup completely ruined. Why are you doing this to me, Whoopi? What did I ever do to you to deserve this kind of treatment? For the first time since the confrontation began, Whoopi's voice softened slightly. You didn't do anything to me personally, Meghan, but you did something to a lot of people who don't have the platform to defend themselves. You used your privilege and your media access to tell a story that made you look like a victim while painting other people as villains. I never called anyone a villain, Meghan protested weakly. You didn't have to, Whoopi replied. You told your story in a way that made it clear who the bad guys were supposed to be. You talked about unnamed family members making racist comments. You talked about being denied help when you were struggling. You painted a picture of an institution that was cruel and unsympathetic, and you made sure everyone knew you were the innocent victim in all of it. Meghan's voice was barely a whisper now. But that's what happened. That's my truth, your truth, Whoopi repeated, shaking her head. Meghan, the truth isn't subjective. Either these things happened the way you said they did, or they didn't. Either you were the perfect duchess who was mistreated by evil in-laws, or you were a difficult person who couldn't adapt to a challenging situation. It can't be both. The studio fell completely silent, except for the sound of Meghan's quiet crying. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath, afraid to make any noise that might break the intensity of the moment. I never said I was perfect, Meghan finally managed to say through her tears. I made mistakes. I was learning, but that doesn't mean I deserve to be treated the way I was treated, and maybe you didn't deserve all of it. Whoopi conceded, her voice gentler now but still firm. But you also didn't deserve to have your every wish granted without question. You married into a family with traditions going back centuries, and instead of trying to understand and respect those traditions, you seem to expect them to change everything to accommodate you. Meghan looked up at Whoopi with eyes full of pain and confusion. Is it so wrong to want to be treated with basic human dignity? Is it so wrong to want your family to protect you from attacks? No, it's not wrong to want those things, Whoopi said. But it's also not wrong for a family to expect you to understand their constraints and limitations. The royal family can't just issue statements defending every family member from every criticism. That's not how they operate, and you knew that going in. But I didn't know it would be like this, Meghan said, her voice small and broken. I didn't know how hard it would be, how isolated I would feel, how much I would lose of myself in the process. Whoopi's expression softened further, and for a moment, combative interviewer was replaced by someone who genuinely understood struggle and hardship. I believe that you didn't know how hard it would be, and I believe that you struggled with the transition, but what I don't understand is why you couldn't find a way to work through those challenges without burning down everything and everyone around you." The question hung in the air, and Meghan seemed to consider it seriously. For the first time her crying had slowed, but the tears were still flowing. "Maybe I could have handled things differently. Maybe I could have been more patient, more understanding. But I was drowning, Whoopi. I felt like I was losing myself, and I didn't know how to ask for help without seeming weak. So you decided to leave and take your story public," Whoopi said, not unkindly. "I decided to tell my truth so that people would understand." Meghan corrected, but even she seemed to hear how that sounded now. Whoopi sat back in her chair, her intense gaze never leaving Meghan's face. "And in telling your truth, you made sure that your version of events would be the only one most people ever heard. You made sure that you would be seen as the victim, and they would be seen as the oppressors." Meghan didn't respond immediately. She sat there, tears still streaming down her face, looking smaller and more vulnerable than anyone had ever seen her in public. The confident, media-savvy Duchess was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely broken and confused. "I don't know what you want me to say, Whoopi," she finally whispered. "I can't take back what I've said. I can't undo the interviews or the documentaries. I told my story because I felt like I had to, and maybe that was selfish, but it was all I knew how to do." Whoopi nodded slowly, as if finally hearing something genuine from Meghan for first time in the entire interview. "That might be the most honest thing you've said since you sat down, and you know what I can respect, that even if I don't agree with your choices." The confrontation seemed to deflate suddenly, the energy in the room shifting from combative to something more complex and nuanced. Meghan was still crying, but quietly now, and Whoopi was watching her with an expression that mixed criticism with something that might have been understanding. "This has been one of the most difficult conversations I've ever had on television," Whoopi said, finally addressing both Meghan and the audience. "But sometimes the most important conversations are the hardest ones to have." Meghan nodded, unable to speak, her emotional reserves completely exhausted. The woman who had walked onto the set with such poise and confidence was gone, replaced by someone raw and human and completely stripped of pretense. As the show prepared to go to commercial break, viewers were left with an image that would be replayed and analyzed for months to come. Meghan Markle crying openly on live television, while Whoopi Goldberg sat across from her, having delivered one of the most brutal, but perhaps necessary, interviews in television history. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Do you believe Whoopi was right to challenge Meghan so directly, or did she go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this.